Legend of Mana's combat system is a bit of a departure from the past Mana games. Rather than a traditional RPG combat system or the top-down view of the past games, Legend of Mana instead opts for a beat-em-up combat system with loose RPG mechanics. This alone makes it a bit more complicated than waiting on charge shots or just spamming the attack button, but Square also took time to add more mechanics and depth to the system to make it much more engaging. The game doesn't do a great job with telling the player these things, so I hope to bring up a clear explanation of how combat works. Combat is handled primarily through light attacks and heavy attacks. Your light attacks are your X button attacks, and if you've ever played a beat-em-up or action game, then you know what this is. Light attacks have a fixed attack count depending on your weapon. Dainty weapons such as the knives or fists typically have more strikes, while the two-handed weapons have less. When you finish your light attack combo, you have a brief cooldown time where you cannot do anything, leaving you vulnerable. It's basically used as an initiation move, or, just to wear someone down. Heavy attacks are 3 attacks that you could perform through the square button. Heavy attacks are different because they act more like fighting game inputs rather than action game inputs. Your most basic heavy attack is the thrust, performed just by pressing square and nothing else. It's a dirty and powerful attack but leaves you open for quite a while. Thrust is typically used as a light combo ender, though it feels more like a liability to me since it has a huge pause time. The second heavy attack is the uppercut, performed by inputting down then forward quickly on the D-pad and pressing square, much like Hadouken in traditional fighting games. This results in a quick attack that pushes enemies away and puts you in a neutral state without a cooldown and can be quite useful. The third heavy attack is the jump attack, performed by pressing left then right quickly on the D-pad then square, or vice versa depending on the target orientation. Try to imagine, Guile's Sonic Boom attack, except, quickly rather than charging. This results in your character jumping a bit and attacking as he lands and has no cooldown as well, which makes it pretty useful as well. Jumping heavy attacks are useful in some ways since it could put you in a situation to start a combo, but it also has some, risk with it, so you gotta be careful when using it. Now during the beginning when Duel says you could typically only follow up a light combo with just the thrust heavy attack, that is not true at all. Heavy attacks can chain in between themselves quite frequently, and while I'm not sure that there's a cap at all, I was able to chain 5 heavy attacks in a row as my best. This becomes very important in combat since being able to stun lock enemies is great for boss fights, and the longer your combo goes on, the easier you can apply the stun and status effect to enemies as well. If you're able to chain heavy attacks well, you could also stop a combo without a problem and just walk out of any potential threat. Suffice to say, learning how to chain heavy attacks is really useful. Abilities are basic actions you can perform in combat, bound to the circle and triangle buttons. You start with jump and defend equipped, but you actually have access to roughly 12 abilities that offer various things such as a stun or a recovery. While each ability is useful in its own, you could also learn new abilities by equipping certain combinations of abilities for a number of battles. Even if you don't learn the command, you can still do certain ability combos anyways by using both buttons at the same time. A prominent example being lunge and retreat becomes evade without learning evade. Learning new abilities is also useful because it allows you to learn new special techniques as well. Special techniques, or STs, are your huge damage button. To use an ST, you need to build up the little meter underneath your HP bar, much like a fighting game's super meter. An ST must be equipped to your shoulder buttons to be used and will expend your entire meter for that single attack. To learn new STs, you need to equip certain combinations of abilities for a certain number of fights, but unlike abilities, you cannot use an ST until you actually learn it. You cannot combo into STs at all, however, using STs gives you a ton of invincibility frames. Typically you use an ST to create some breathing room, or whenever a window of opportunity presents itself since the startup is quite long. Also, your ST meter is preserved across each fight, but meter builds up really quickly, so don't be afraid to use an ST. It's great for expediting random encounters. Syncro is an interesting mechanic. Every character has a Syncro, which gives a useful effect to nearby allies, but never to the owner itself. Some are really useful, ranging from HP regen to extra damage to quicker ST buildup, and each ally Syncro for the most part is unique. Syncro is applied whenever you're near someone, and it goes into effect when you see lightning pass in between the ally HP bars at the top of the screen. While you can't choose your allies for the most part, pet Synchros add more variety in situations, and knowing how to handle your current ally's Syncro can make combat far more interesting and varied. Movement in Legend of Mana's combat is not in depth, but it has some key factors to address. Unlike the overworld, combat movement can best be described as bursts of movement. While you can shift direction of movement on a dime, your move speed winds down to bursts of speed with a second of slowdown. Certain abilities allow you to subvert this issue with benefits, such as evade or tackle. Finally, Y-axis movement is pretty powerful. Most basic enemies lacked range in that area, so if you find yourself in trouble, just shift up. You'll be safe. Thanks for watching, guys!